today we are once again talking about PSA's grading guarantee because we have yet another clear-cut example of a collector getting burned, this time out of $7,500 USD, because an expectation gap exists between what they actually stand by as a business, what their guarantee actually covers, versus what collectors think they do. And it's a big problem. It's something that we've touched on many times on this channel in the past, and I want to use this story as a reminder to you all that you guys need to be making sure you're aware exactly what their guarantee covers, because I can guarantee one thing, yes, that's a pun intended, and it's not as much as what you think it is, and it probably covers a heck of a lot less. Now, this is a very important one and does in fact relate to an individual that has been using their set registry for many years. The guy on the left is Frank Rodriguez. This is a video from Sports Card Madness. Nick is the host of this, and he basically reached out to me and said, you need to look into this story because this is a big problem. And essentially what went down is, like I said, Frank is a big time collector. He has a heck of a lot of PSA cards. He has a heck of a lot of things within their set registry. He's a huge proponent of it, and he's working on completing a few sets. And one of those is the 1969 Topps basketball set. It's referred to as the Tall Boy set, if I remember correctly. If I also recall, this is the set that has the Kareem rookie card within it. He's basically working on this set, but he's not just working on completing a full set. He's working on it, being autographed by each of the athletes. So it's a big chase, and it's something that's, quite active for him to pursue to get into his registry. Now, in the interview, he says he only needs 3 or 4 of these cards, and Art Harris is one of them. That's sort of where the story begins to unfold, because the community is quite small when it comes to guys chasing these kinds of things for their registry. And somebody reached out to him, a dealer reached out to him and said, I've got one just authenticated by PSA. And this was in October of 2023. And I believe it is the card that is currently on screen right now that he purchased from this individual. And this is where things get, a bit interesting. So this guy is obviously trying to work on the set. Art's autograph is apparently quite difficult to come by. So the fact that it was already authenticated by PSA, he was like, yes, it's a no-brainer. I'm going to pay you for it because I desperately want to complete my set. And like I said, this is where things get pretty interesting, because Frank wants to basically have this added to his registry. And what you guys will notice by looking at the card itself is the label. The label basically just says trading card. And I've talked about this on the channel a few times in the last few months. PSA have recently changed their labels again when it comes to stuff like this, because when you just get an autograph authenticated, they'll typically label it as just trading card, right? They won't label the card from the set or anything like that because they haven't authenticated the card. They want to make clear that they're only looking at the autograph. And this, label designation has caused a lot of confusion in the past. Now, because he wants to get it into his set, the card also has to be graded, is my understanding. So he sent it back into PSA in November. So he bought it in October, sent it back in November. So, a month after it was initially authenticated by PSA. Now, he paid for an express turnaround, which is 5 business days, but unfortunately, it's got a limit of $2,500 declared value. He paid $7,500. So we'll get to this a little bit later on. And this is where things get, a little bit spicy, because as, Frank does explain in this interview, and I urge you to check it out after you're done watching this one, is PSA sort of went silent on this thing. And instead of taking 5 business days, it ended up taking 5 months. And eventually he gets a hold of them in the new year, and PSA come to him and say, well, we're no longer standing by this autograph. We don't believe it's authentic anymore, which is obviously something well within their rights. Opinions can change. But you wouldn't expect it to happen in the space of 5 months. But this is where Frank himself was caught a little bit off guard. And this is where I assume many within the hobby are also going to be caught off guard, because you'll think, well, I bought this thing in a PSA slab. They've authenticated it, irrespective of changing their mind within 5 months. I bought it because you guys signed off on it. How are you going to protect me? How am I going to get my $7,500 back? But unfortunately, their grading guarantee does not apply to autographs. It does not apply to autograph authentication. So straight off the bat, this guy is crap out of luck, right? They're not going to stand by it. Now, what is pretty funny with this whole situation is PSA, out of courtesy, apparently, have said to him, well, we'll actually pay out on it, but we've done a bit of research and we think this card's only worth about $10. And the auction that they actually reference is from 2017 or 2018, which is absurd, right? You're comparing something, 6 years earlier. Another classic case of PSA cherry picking what values they want to use when it comes to paying out and what values they want to use when it comes to upcharging. But that's obviously a far cry from the $7,500 he's paid for, and also from the $2,500 he actually declared. But this is, quite an alarming thing for Frank, because he talks to it in this video. He saw PSA, authenticated it. He only bought it because they authenticated it. But now they don't stand by it. So what is he going to do next? And I'm assuming many of you guys would be thinking the same way. And it's something that you guys need to be very much across, because there is a huge expectation gap between what PSA is actually doing versus what people think they're doing. There's an inherent belief that PSA is authenticating everything and they're going to stand by their work. And that is certainly not the case. You read their guarantee and there are so many caveats in there that you would be shocked what actually does, clarify and classify as something they'll stand behind. And I'll get to that in a second. I'll show it on screen to give you guys some context. But this is a big problem that I've been talking about for, 18 months and 2 years now, because it doesn't just stick with collectors thinking that PSA is going to stand behind something because they see it in a slab and they're a grader and they're grading something. So surely they're going to stand by it. But it also flows into businesses too, where you've got PWCC and other auction houses saying, well, you've bought a fake card. It's now been determined to be fake. You need to go talk to the grader. But then you go talk to the grader and they say, well, guess what? We can't stand by it for this reason. Like, there's this belief out there where all these sort of companies are relying on a grader to stand by their assessment, but it doesn't actually exist. They don't actually stand by their assessment. So it's essentially a house of cards, in my opinion. It's like dominoes. It just keeps getting shifted down until it ends up in the hands of a collector who is the one that has to pay the bill at the end, or miss out on the fact they've paid a heck of a lot of money for a fake card, for an altered card, for a card that, PSA now deemed not authentic. It's insane how that gap exists, and you guys need to be across it. And it gets pretty big when you look at the stories we covered recently, right? Where you have this, fake PMG saga, again with BGS. BGS don't have a guarantee at all. Yet if PSA were to have one, you'd actually not been covered by PSA in that particular situation either, because it's a mislabel. Mislabels are not covered by PSA's grading guarantee, which is, again, absurd. Like, you think these companies are sort of doing something and standing by stuff, but they're not. And you guys need to be aware of it. It's, crazy, especially when you're talking about the amount of money people are spending on their cards and collections. Like, overnight, someone at PSA could change your opinion, just like they did in this particular instance. In the space of 5 months, PSA have changed their stance on something. And now if you were to own that card, you're out of pocket all that money. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's absurd. It's crazy. And I don't understand how more people aren't across this whole situation. Now, like I said, I'll quickly go through PSA's guarantee, because it's something that you guys need to be reading for yourself. And I'll put the link down below. But there are so many things here that PSA basically say why it doesn't apply. And I'll step through them now as I've done in the past. Guarantee does not apply to the original submitter. So if you're grading your PC, their grading guarantee does not stand by you. It's not going to work for you. It's not going to do anything for you. It is what it is. You only protect it if you're buying it, and you only protect it in some very specific situations. It says a few things like it doesn't apply to clerical errors. It does not apply to clerical or mechanical errors, which is a mislabel, which is what I just alluded to with that fake PMG. Basically, BGS accidentally graded it as a PMG when it was a base card. So if PSA had done the same thing, you would not be protected, because they classify that as a clerical error. They don't classify that as being something they should be standing behind. And I should give a caveat here. Yes, PSA have made exceptions in the past to this kind of thing, but given that their policy explicitly states what does and does not apply, don't expect them to do you any favors when it comes time to making a claim. Like what we're seeing here with Frank, where they're quoting, auction sales from 2017 and 2018, right? They're not going to stand behind you, and don't assume that it's going to benefit you, because it's not going to happen. They talk about other things such as manufacturer defects, which is maybe not super important, but what is important for today is the guarantee does not apply to the authenticity or grade assigned to any autograph, whether certified by a manufacturer or applied after its release, i.e. meaning PSA themselves have authenticated it, which is wild. You expect a company putting their name to something to be standing by their work, but here it basically says you're out of luck, mate. Sorry. And it's a big problem, especially when you're looking at the fact that within the space of 5 months, like we're seeing in this particular instance here, PSA can change their opinion. Firstly, it's absurd they can change their opinion within the space of 5 months this drastically, right? You'd expect them to be having a fairly robust process, a fairly robust risk appetite that is not going to be a change of the wind direction that's going to be determining whether something is real or not, right? Like, obviously, when it comes to grades, opinions can change depending on the grader's mood between a 9 and 9.5, a 10, whatever it is. But to go from saying an autograph is real and fake within 5 months is crazy. You'd expect them to be, operating under a mindset of beyond a reasonable doubt kind of thing. They're not going to have close calls where it's like 50-50 or 51-49, so they're going to say it's genuine. They're not going to really be doing that or operating like that, because if it's a close call, they're not going to be standing by it, because, from a risk appetite perspective, there's too much risk involved. So what has sort of happened in the space of 5 months for this to happen? And, what Nick and others have since talked to is the fact that the autograph very much is counterfeit. It looks fake and all that sort of stuff. So it's essentially the right outcome. But what we're talking about here is how PSA could make that mistake in the first place, but then not stand by their work. what does this mean, in other situations where you've got a card graded as a 10 that you've paid for, you send it back in because maybe you want to get a new PSA slab, and then they're now saying it's a 4 or 5 or a 6 due to a clerical error because they're not going to protect you in that instance as per their grading guarantee. It's just a really unfortunate thing where, like I've said many times now, an expectation gap exists. People have this inherent belief that these companies are going to stand by their work, but they're not going to. And I can't recall earlier if I mentioned that Frank is obviously someone that's been using this service for many, many years. So for him to have that belief is a huge question mark for PSA. The fact that somebody like him that's been using his service that apparently has hundreds of sets registered with PSA could not be aware of what they do and do not stand by, that speaks to a big problem in my opinion. And you read this grading guarantee and it's a heck of a lot more than what you think it is. And it's just wild to me how you can sort of have a company, offering a service, doing something, but then not standing by it. And I've said this many times before when it comes to ranking each of these grading guarantees against each other. You basically have CGC, PSA, then BGS and SGC doing absolutely nothing, right? Nothing is defined within those two processes or policies, but at least CGC and PSA do something. But again, it doesn't mean they're going to actually stand by it either. They either say this applies, this doesn't apply, but even if it does apply, they're still going to hold your card hostage and make you work for it to get that refund. Or, like they've done in this instance, cherry pick an absolute bullshit price from 8 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever it is, before the boom happened to not reflect what the actual value of the card is in the first place. It's just a crazy situation. I've since, seen since the interview happened that Ryan Hodge, who I think is the president of PSA Collectors, is looking into this to try and make it right, which you really hope is what actually happens. Like, obviously, they're not going to pay out on the $7,500 because he declared it incorrectly, but you'd like to see them pay out on the $2,500 or something along those lines. Do something right by this particular instance, because irrespective of whether or not the authenticity guarantee covers autographs, this is just a really messy situation with how their opinion can go from authentic 5 months ago to not authentic today. And I will say once again, it is okay for their opinion to change, but not in the space of 5 months. I think that's weird to me. That doesn't make sense, and that doesn't seem to be a business that knows what they're doing, in my opinion. Now, I've mentioned CGC in the past. They also have a grading guarantee, which I'll bring up on screen once again. They are a bit more explicit with what you're actually covered with. You're actually protected, firstly, if you are the submitter of the card yourself, whereas like PSA, you're not. So if you're submitting your PC cards, your guarantee is protected here, or your card is protected here. They make some more designations around clerical errors and mechanical errors and all that kind of stuff, and give you some examples of what one is. I think for a card, they're basically saying they've given a card a 10 when it should be a 1. Clear and obvious errors is what they're talking about when it comes to stuff like this, but not really much else. So again, it's not clearly defined here, and it's still up to the discretion of the grader. But the messaging and the mindset you guys should be taking when it comes to grading guarantees is to literally just assume that they don't exist. Don't expect anything back from these companies, because you're not going to get it. And whilst they have made exceptions in the past, outside of their policies and all that kind of thing, do not expect anything from them. Expect your money gone the second you pay for one of these cards in your slabs, and you're going to have a lot more fun participating and collecting and being part of this hobby, because your day is going to be ruined by someone like this grader who's just ruined the day for Frank, if you know where I'm going. It's just wild, and I can't believe there's a expectation gap that still exists. I can't fathom how people are still not understanding what value they're getting. It's mind-boggling to me. It's just insane how a company will not stand by their work, and you guys just need to approach it the way I said. I take a $0 cost-based approach. I'm going to talk to this again. The regulars on the channel will know this by now and will be sick of it by now, but every single card I buy is paid for with my hobby. It's paid for with profits and selling of other cards and stuff like that, specifically for situations like this. Because if any one of my cards had been graded by PSA or CGC come out to be fake, altered, whatever, I've already made the money back because I paid for it with profits only. I'm not going to be stuck $7,500 out of pocket because a grader decided to change his mind 5 months later. It's just wild to me, but I thought that was an important one to talk to. So, please check out the Sports Card Madness interview. It's actually quite good. It's really good to hear Frank's point of view as well, and sort of his frustrations and what he thinks PSA is actually doing. And, I'm not going to be surprised if there's legal action off the back of this, if they can't rectify it itself, because, you've got a policy in place that says you do this and don't do this, but your whole premise of a business is to be a third-party grader, right? PSA present themselves as being a leader when it comes to authentication services. You can't present yourself that way and then not stand by your work when people have issues. And more importantly, this bullshit when it comes to cherry-picking values needs to stop as well. If you want to be using recent comps to upcharge, you need to be using recent comps when it comes to paying out on your insurance claims too. Anyway, I've rambled a heck of a lot today. I'll put chapters down below for you guys to reference, but it is what it is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.